Are you ready to go? Okay.
He didn't even tell me.
We are going to call to order our Narragansett Town Council work session. Today is Monday, October 23rd. The time is 5:06. This work session is a work session with staff and members of the Planning Board to review the various regulatory provisions to be revised for compliance with the 2023 housing statutes adopted by the Rhode Island General Assembly. And just for a little bit of background on this, in June 2023, 10 bills were passed into law by the Rhode Island General Assembly that impact city and town development-related regulations. The Planning Board is currently working to address the numerous provisions that will require updating to the town's zoning ordinance or the subdivision and land development regulations. To date, the staff has identified areas of the ordinances that will need revisions, and the board has divided up into 3 subcommittees to initiate the first steps in drafting the specific text changes, as well as to note areas of existing text to be deleted. So the Planning Board and staff requested this work session for a first review of the ongoing project. This will focus on areas of regulation subject to change and on the process. The Planning Board foresees bringing the project to completion by year's end, and the staff expects to have required text completed by early November and a public hearing held in late November to meet the December 31st state-mandated deadline for adoption of all necessary changes. So today I'm going to have the Planning Board Chair speak, and then we'll have our Community Development Director speak on this as well. Members of the public won't be speaking on this because there will be a public hearing in which public will have the opportunity to speak. After the presentation is made by our Community Development Director, Mr. DeLuca, I will have any council member if they have any questions, they can ask those questions at that time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Terry Fleming.
Thank you, Council President. Terry Fleming from the Planning Board. Very briefly, Michael DeLuca will give an overview of what you're going to be presented with in terms of the specific changes to the ordinance. We're not going to get into detail tonight. As you indicated, that's for the special hearing. We just wanted to give you a broad brush overview of what has to be done. I just want to make a few quick points. One is, you have probably heard, and you probably know this is not true, but you will continue to be presented with people characterizing this package of bills out of the State House as designed to promote and enhance affordable housing. I took an informal poll of some people who have been involved in this, including myself, for the last 6 months or however, and there's about 20 to 25% of these bills that actually apply to affordable housing. The rest are just purely gifts to the development community for people to build bigger and bigger and bigger houses. Very little of it is really about affordable housing, but you will see a component of that. When you're presented with this, it's overwhelming, the volume of material. If I can give you any advice, it would be to recognize that 90% of this is required and mandatory by state law. You may wring your hands and throw up your hands and say, how could they do this? What were they thinking? As we have. But push through that, because there's nothing you can do about 90% of it. It's law. Now, if you want to send your representatives back to the State House after the fact to try to change the law, that's the process in this country. But this is the law, and 90% of it, the staff, legal counsel, and the Planning Board subcommittees have spent a great deal of time just putting the components of the ordinance where they should be in our ordinance, which is just housekeeping, but there's nothing you can do to change that. What I'd ask you to focus on is the discretionary aspects of this. About 10% of it, we have the latitude to make certain changes, and we've spent a lot of time on this. without getting into detail, and I won't, the biggest component of that is the modification section, which says for all intents and purposes, a builder, a developer, a homeowner can have essentially a 15% increase in any dimensional standard without going through the planning and zoning boards. Now, there are steps that have to be taken and things that can result in appeals, but basically, the process of asking for a variance today requires you to go through planning and zoning. There's a 15% window that people can have without even coming to us. We have a response to that, which we're going to present to you, and we'd ask you to seriously consider it. So again, the mandatory items, they are what they are. Please try to focus on the discretionary. And the last point I'll make, and I'll make it again later, and other people will make it, and I know council members don't always want to hear this, but this is another unfunded mandate from one government entity down to another, from the state down to all the municipalities. There's no money to do this, but it's going to result in a tremendous increase in workload for the building inspector's office and the community development office and the planning board and the zoning board. You really need, as a resident, I'm asking you to really consider additional funding, additional personnel, resources, whatever's necessary, because you just can't say work longer, work smarter, work harder. There's so much that's going to be required of this that you're going to have to make hard decisions, I think, about personnel and staffing of those, particularly those departments. And I'll leave you one last thing. Remember, those of you that know subdivisions, affordable housing, variances, they all come with timelines and deadlines. And you know what happens if the town, the staff, or the boards don't meet the deadlines. It's approved by default. The worst outcome is that something gets approved and the town hasn't even had a chance to say up or down. So those deadlines, and some of them are even tighter than they were. So I'd ask you again not to overstate it. Please consider that. I know it's difficult with budgets and tax rates and all, but it's very important that this is properly funded. We don't have a choice for this. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Good evening. With that as an introduction, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the process part of what we'll be doing between now and December 31st. We don't have any content here available for you right now. Not to say that it's not being written. As we stand here in the council chamber, the boardroom is set up for a working session that will start at 6 p.m. And in there, we're going to be reviewing about 200 pages of very early draft regulation. So you will all get to see that once it's been fine-tuned and made to be a reasonably acceptable draft for review. So let me start by giving you a quick overview. All those letters and numbers are the designations of the bills that were passed. So H6059, that is House Bill 6059. There was a Senate complement to that also, I didn't put it in there. So on zoning, there were two bills just addressing general zoning, 59 and 90. On low mod income housing, there were two bills, 6058, 6081. Subdivision had one bill, 50-page bill, 6061A. Comprehensive plan, there were two bills. We're not going to talk about that too much, even when you see our presentation in a couple weeks, because most of that is just mandatory procedural requirements. And then there are three other bills that are relevant to things like, you probably all heard of the State Housing Appeals Board. That board is being abolished. It's going to be replaced with a special segment within Superior Court. So Superior Court's taking over all the appeals. So We're not going to go over these bills. I'm just letting you know, those are the bills that we're talking about. In response, what we are trying to do for you is make some order out of these 10 bills. And what we wanted to do, what we anticipated doing was drafting you 5 ordinances. The way it has turned out is we have 4. So item 1 and item 4 on this list will be combined into the same ordinance. So the required provisions and standards under zoning, and then the required special use permit criteria. Those are both in one ordinance that is in process right now. There'll be another ordinance just on discretionary standards. There'll be one on the low mod income housing provisions. And then there's one on subdivision land development and 2 new elements of the of state law that we never had. They did have, but they were voluntary before. Now they're mandatory: development plan review and unified development review. I'll get into that in a bit. So here's a brief overview of the mandatory provisions. Our town already has a provision for substandard lots of record and how we could allow for them to be developed. Most communities don't. So we're a little bit ahead of the curve, but now the state law mandates that you have to allow reduced dimensional requirements. And there's actually a specification as to how to go about doing that, which is different from the way we have been doing it. The section in the zoning ordinance that has that is going to be rewritten. Oops, wait, I don't want to go forward yet, sorry. We require, this second bullet is one that is of great concern to the planning board, that it requires a provision for modifications for dimensional variances of 15% or less. It also allows up to 25% of modification. Now what this, and most importantly, it eliminates the notice requirement for variances of 5%. Modification has always been in the state law, at least since 1991, but it was voluntary. Our town never had it. What it says is that the building official can grant a little bit of relief without having to send you to the zoning board. The process was that the applicant would submit an application for zoning relief. He would notify all of his abutters, and then if there were no negative comments, the building official could issue the relief, up to 25% of the dimension. So a 10-foot setback, he could issue relief up to 2.5 feet. Now it's mandatory, and 5% is across the board, no required notification. 15% notification is required, but if there's no negative commentary, it has to be granted. That's of great concern. It also allows, as a permitted use, adaptive reuse of commercial structures for residential purposes, no matter what the underlying zoning is. It revises the standard for merger clause. Merger, I'm not going to get into it in lengthy detail, but it requires substandard lots of record that are owned in common to be considered as one. Now that merger clause is being, I'd say, loosened, relaxed. It eliminates, for the zoning board, it eliminates one of their very strong standards, the least relief necessary. That is not in the law anymore. And it doesn't, and it also eliminates the need to be an application to be compliant with the comprehensive plan. These are 2 very powerful tools that the zoning board has used that now they don't have available. It expands the mere inconvenience standard. Mere inconvenience is a standard the zoning board has applied for years, and what it does is not really expand it as much as clarify the intention and the application of it. It requires, this is one of the things that my staff has been putting an enormous amount of work into, and members of the planning board. It requires specific criteria for every special use permit we issue. Now, our schedule of uses has 11 pages in 4 font. I don't know how many different uses there are. It's well over 200. And of those 200, there's probably a third of those have some special use permit component. Every one of those has to have a standard of review. So that's a big lift. And it also requires allowance for standard special use permits with dimensional variances. In the past, they granted the authority to the towns, but the towns had to set specifications. Now the General Assembly has removed all those specifications and just said variances and special use permits can be issued together. So again, kind of a weakening of the local regulatory procedures. Mandatory provisions for comp permits. Comp permits is the term we use for the affordable housing developments that request density relief. You might recall that comp permits, comprehensive permits, go to the planning board. The planning board has authority to issue zoning relief as well as the development plan approval. They've changed several components of that law. First of all, the standard for meeting local housing needs has been changed to being equal to 20% of the approved housing units in each calendar year. That is actually something that benefits the town because it sets a limit on a year-by-year basis of how many affordable housing units we are required to accept. So if we have issued approval of 100 houses in 1 year, then we'd only need to approve up to 20, but no more than 20 units of affordable housing. That's actually a good provision. It revises the definition of municipal government subsidy. I won't get into a lot of detail. It mandates specific density bonus formula for areas with and without water and sewer service. This takes away the negotiation authority that the planning board has exercised since 2005, where they would look at, the impact of a development on a site, what the site constraints are, and work with the developer to come up with a reasonable density. Now the General Assembly has given us a formula. I won't go through the formula, but we don't agree with it. It mandates specific density bonus formula dependent upon the percentage of low-mod housing that is proposed. What that means is if a development is proposing 25% affordable housing, it has a maximum percentage of a density relief of something. If it goes up to 50% affordable housing, that density relief goes up, all the way up to 100%. It limits the town's ability to place restrictions of parking or bedrooms. We haven't, in our experience, done a lot of that, but there have been other communities that have made the amount of parking available or the number of bedrooms that could be allowed in a development plan, a comprehensive permit plan, a maximum limit. They put an upper limit on those things. It limits the town's ability to place restrictions. The master plan is eliminated. You might recall, master plan is a general plan design of a site that gives, and at that level, there's not a lot of money been spent on the private side. There's been a lot of input from the planning board. There's still a lot of room for flexibility. They've taken that out. And they've made the final plan administrative. So that puts the responsibility on the shoulders of the planning director or the administrative officer, whomever that is. And it's, it's another job to do. Okay, on public notice, I'm not going to read all this. There's 3 things we need to know about this. When we're doing, when we're revising regulations, we have to put ads in the paper once a week for 3 successive weeks. For developments, we have to post in 2 municipal buildings, hard copy. That was never required. We also have to post on the town website and notice to the abutters would be first-class mail only. We've already moved to that anyway, with the exception of subdivisions because the state law required certified mailing up to this point. But for zoning, we have. That takes effect immediately. We have been exercising that. With regard to comprehensive plan, it mandates that the comp plans have a 5-year strategic planning element. Now, our plan was approved in 2017. It's good till 2027. This will not be impacting us until after 2027, but from now on, then on, every 5 years, you have to have a strategic planning element. There has to be annual reports to the town council of progress towards implementation of strategic goals. And the last one, we don't have to worry about that. Our plan is not 12 years old. But what it does say is we have to make sure that our plan gets rewritten by and on the books by 2029. If not, then you cannot use the comprehensive plan as a rationale for denying a development. So if someone came in and the comprehensive plan designates a site low-density residential, and someone comes in with a high-density residential proposal, we can't rely on that as our rationale for denial if it's over 12 years old. We get up till March 1st to make those revisions. The text gets really small here because there's a lot of changes in the subdivision regulations. First of all, minor subdivisions were always 5 units or less, whether it's multifamily 5 units or 5 lots. It now goes up to 9. So a major development is 10 or more. It also mandates something called Unified Development Review. I mentioned that early on. Unified Development Review will give the authority to the planning board to approve developments and the zoning variances necessary for those developments. So if there's a density relief necessary, or because density relief is necessary, lot sizes have to shrink, the planning board has the authority to do that. It would be through this interim step called Unified Development Review, which essentially takes the place of zoning board relief. So here are a few things we need to know. It defines minor land developments as up to 7,500 square feet of gross floor area for commercial or industrial, or expansion up to 50% of up to 10,000 square feet. Mixed-use developments, including 6 units of residential and up to 2,500 square feet of gross floor area, would all be considered minor developments. Multifamily developments of 9 units or less, we know that. If there's a change of use where no extensive construction is proposed, that's a minor development. If there's an adaptive reuse up to 25,000 square feet gross floor area, that's a minor development. When you get to major, it's all those things, it's above all of those standards, as you could imagine. There's a public hearing at the master plan stage. There used to be something called the informational hearing, loose and relaxed and open-ended and general concepts. Now you have a full-blown master plan hearing, and at preliminary, there's no hearing. We feel as though that's reversing the levels of importance here. State permits are still due prior to decision on preliminary plan, but no references need to be made at master plan public hearing. The administrative officer is authorized to combine review stages, which isn't a bad idea, and unified development review, as I mentioned. Last line, all appeals of decisions go directly to Superior Court. So if I, or whoever the administrative officer is, approves a final development plan or denies it, anyone who wants to appeal that goes directly to Superior Court. More. Development plan review. This is another new step. Development plan review, the only way I can describe this is it's kind of like subdivision light. Like it's smaller developments, generally not even subdivision, more like small land developments that don't necessarily need full-blown, extensive public hearings, at least in the eyes of the General Assembly. So what kinds of things qualify? Well, a change of use with no extensive construction. It doesn't even say whether that's within zoning or not. Adaptive reuse, as we talked about before, in a commercial zone. Adaptive reuse in a residential zone. So you take maybe an old school that's in a residential zone and you adaptively reuse it for multifamily housing. If it's in a residential zone, it has less than 9 units, then it could go to development plan review. Development in urban growth centers. We don't have an urban growth center. We have urban renewal, whole different animal. Urban growth centers are designated in your comprehensive plan, and they have a specific definition, so that's not really relevant to us. Institutional development design review for education or hospital facilities. Not sure how much we'll get of that. And development in an historic district There's no description of what they mean by that. Residential development, commercial development, mixed-use development, I don't know. The process breaks down to either administrative or formal, and administrative would be staff, administrative officer reviewing those plans and issuing a single level, one approval to end it all. If it goes to formal, the planning board handles it, and it goes as a preliminary and a final. And it can, development plan review can get relief through the unified development process. So you're all looking kind of confused, and believe me, I've been at it for 6 months, and I'm still kind of confused. There's a lot of new steps in the game. This is the last panel. This is the one you may have some questions about. These are the discretionary provisions. These are the things we may have some authority to adjust in order to respond to the mandated requirements I just told you all about. So dimensional standards. I told you about the modification, the 15% modification, and the fact that that means a 10-foot side yard setback could turn into an 8.5-foot side yard setback. Certainly a 9.5-foot side setback with no relief, no public hearings or anything. So there's some thought about us possibly changing the setbacks. So maybe a 10-foot setback now becomes a 12-foot setback. And when you make that adjustment, it comes down to the same sort of regulatory restriction we have today. There are a lot of examples, I won't go into them. We have to create regulatory standards for the adaptive reuse of commercial properties, which I've already mentioned a few times. We have to put together a set of standards, but there are standards. There's not a lot of mandatory language in the state law that tells us what we have to do there. So that's good. In fact, we have to do it. It's up to you to decide for yourselves if you like that or not, but at least we have control over what the standards will be. We get to define the categories of projects that go into administrative development plan review versus the formal planning review. So where does that criterion break? We get to make that choice at the local level. We get to install procedures for unified development review. Inclusionary zoning. We designate a number of the percentage of low-mod housing in new major developments. Inclusionary zoning is a really tough one, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. I want to give you folks some time for Q&A. We have it in the books now. The ordinance we have in the books is somewhat obsolete, but they put a formula in the inclusionary zoning component of one of these bills that makes it very difficult to approve a development on a property that's, say, zoned for 10 lots and meeting the standards of review that they have designated without quadrupling the density. So thankfully, the reason I have it on this page, on this slide, is inclusionary zoning is not mandatory. We could eliminate it completely from the zoning ordinance if we'd like. I'm aware that there are a handful of communities that are already considering that. So these are all things that will be discussed in the next few hours with Planning Board at the workshop we're going to hold after 6 p.m. And we hope to wrap that all up by the end of this week and have something for you in a more refined, finished state that addresses all the things in those slides very soon afterward. With that, I could take some questions. Obviously, Planning Board Chairman is here also to answer questions if you'd like.
Thank you. I know I'm trying to wrap my head around all that, and I saw the council members writing down questions. So what I'm going to do is, there may be more than one question from each one, so I'm just going to have each one ask the first question, and we'll go back and forth, see how many questions we can get through. With that, Councilor Kopak.
I have a few questions, so I'm asking just one question
Just
at
ask
a
one,
time.
yeah, because I'm not sure.
Could you just define in lieu fees, please?
In lieu fees. In regard to comprehensive permits, or even inclusionary zoning, an in lieu fee is intended to be a fee that a payment that the developer would make to the town to offset the cost of developing something. Now, with comprehensive permits, it would be affordable units. So if someone wanted to build a development, but they didn't want to build all or any of their affordable units, they could pay an in lieu fee. The in lieu fee component is also voluntary, and right now, the amount that the state dictates the amount per dwelling unit. The amount of the fee has not risen to a level yet that I feel comfortable recommending to you. And I didn't recommend it back in 2005 when they first did it. They did change the fee amount. For our community, it used to be $40,000. And you think about that. A developer would give us $40,000 and he wouldn't have to build an affordable unit, but we would.
So that's what I kind of looked it up, was trying to figure it out this afternoon and didn't get very far. But what I assumed was the fee was intended to be used for the affordable housing that wasn't going to be,
That's
created
correct.
by the builder. $40,000 isn't going to get you a garage,
Well,
for God's sake.
in their
It's not going to get you a
defense-
bathroom, trust me.
I will say that this General Assembly changed that formula and brought it up to 120,000.
You
Still
shouldn't get the
doesn't seem
bathroom in.
to make the kind of dent that I think would be necessary
No.
for us to actually take this on. So
Okay.
we do not have an in lieu fee
Okay.
in our ordinance.
But would we be required to put one in then, or we
No.
just don't have to do anything? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Ferrandi, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Eva. Let me first of all say, the ladies and gentlemen that have been working on this, I give you guys a lot of credit.
Yeah.
It's one of the most important things that can happen in this town in a long time. So, and there's a lot of details, a lot of crossing the Ts, dotting the Is, and all that. So, I just have a couple of questions on some of the process. Let's say these are the more, you had mentioned you have a counter to it or some kind of response to different items. And I'm looking at the variance of 15% or less. It allows up to 25, and then there's a variance of 5%. So I guess if we're looking to counter it, we would take our regulations and go up to that amount, make them restrictive of 15%, and they'd be back to where they were, because that's really what our residents are going to see out here, when you're getting, everybody's going to be a lot of name calling, what happened. So as long as everybody knows that. The 5%, is that counted in that also?
Yeah.
To determine that? So it would actually be 20%.
Oh,
You're going to
no.
adjust, because where does that 5% go by right? I'm a little confused with that.
It's
And could that be a sticking point, or should we think about adding that in as a coefficient?
It's not added above the 15%, it's within the 15%, okay? So at 5% request for relief, the building official would be allowed to issue that approval with virtually no need for any sort of commentary or contact with the neighbors. If they're going between 5 and 15%, then all of the notification has to go out to the neighbors, very similar to the way people notify neighbors for zoning relief. But the answer, if there is no response within I think it's 20-day window, 10 days, thank you, gentlemen. I thought it changed, couldn't remember. Then no answer within 10 days. People go on vacation for 2 weeks, right? No answer within 10 days, the building official issues the building permit.
Right.
So the 5 is part of the 15, it's not additive to the 15, just to answer your question.
So,
Excuse me. No, that's all, it's completely administrative process. The building official carries that out.
right, so that wasn't in there, but I guess he had the ability, but before?
Yes.
Just was never used very often, or?
It's in the zoning enabling law. It enables the town to do it,
Right.
but the town never took up the opportunity, and we never wrote it into the ordinance.
But so if you rewrite the ordinance where it's now 10-foot goes down to whatever it is, 8.5, is there relief from the 8.5 to bring it less than what 10 would be originally? Follow what I'm saying? Like, can
No,
there,
the process, the process is mandatory.
right,
So using the example of a side yard setback of 8.5 feet, if someone asked for 15% relief on that, and there were no objectors, then they would get up to the 10-foot side setback. I mean, I'm sorry.
The other way.
Yeah.
To reduce it to that, right?
I've
Okay,
done this a couple of times, and I've made the mistake. With side setback, we would set a new setback of like 11.5.
right,
And so if you asked for relief, it would come back down to 10 feet. With something like height, as Terry just mentioned, we would reduce the height to 15%
Same thing,
less than
right,
35 feet. If he asked for the 15% relief,
It takes you
he'd get up to 35 feet. So it's a matter of maximums and minimums. And you
Yeah,
have to
so
remember
you-
whether or not you're increasing the requirement or decreasing the requirement.
yeah, so,
I'm sorry if I confused you.
no, I understand. So the 5% goes back to where it would be by right, would come back to the 10 feet, which
That's
is where we were. That's what I was concerned about. And, one more question, Emma? Well, you can go around. if you
Yeah, I'm
want.
going to go around. Oh, I'll come back to you, don't worry. You'll have time. Councilor Lawler?
Excuse me.
So, Mr. DeLuca, I can only speak to myself, the confusion on my face. I've been watching the State House on TV, and I saw when they passed this, and I agree with Mr. Fleming that they're billing this as this is something positive for affordable housing. I don't see anything here that's positive for affordable housing. And I combine that, the confusion with me from having just watched the short-term rental with the State House as well, with what they're looking for that. And it come to a conclusion, and I would love your thoughts and planning board thoughts on how does this actually, not the short-term rental, although I think short-term rental has everything to do with affordable housing in this town especially, but how does this, what the State House is mandating, to Terry's point, mandating to us, how does this affect Narragansett, and who really will benefit from this? What is that?
How does it benefit Narragansett?
Oh, who's it going to benefit? I know what I think.
As staff, I don't feel comfortable issuing my opinion. Mr. Fleming, I think, did a great job of summarizing how the combined impact of all these bills will affect this town and many other smaller towns, because it does relieve certain standards, reduce process, and speed up the process for development approval. It also puts a great deal of burden on staff to make certain that we've got every single thing we could possibly need in order to issue administrative approvals that previously were going to the boards.
I understand that that's the reason why Mr. Fleming is saying we're going to need more, but how does what the state has thrown at us, how does this look in this town? I mean, how will what they're saying, how will this help or hurt, or what will it do for affordable housing? All 5 of us are looking at affordable housing as a big issue, but how is this process that the state has tried to tell us is about affordable housing, how will it actually impact affordable housing here?
It may lead to more applications coming in.
Okay.
I don't know that they will be advantageous, but there is one provision that does say you can get a higher density relief if you have more than the minimum number of affordable units. The minimum has always been 25%. So if you move up to 50% affordable units, you can get higher density. Now, they're dictating that to us. Mm-hmm. I can tell you from my experience with the planning board for the last 18 years that this board has been tremendously supportive of development plans that are 50% or exceeding 50%, as long as the land can handle it, as long as the roadways can handle it, sewer systems, et cetera. Clark Point at the Camp Jory site is a good example of that. So it's not, I don't know that it adds any great beneficial result to the town at all. This planning board has been very supportive. And when developments come in that exceed the carrying capacity of the property or have other significant negative impacts, that's when they deny them.
Okay, so it might help other towns, but it's not going to help. It's not going to do anything for us. And you guys have done a great job. I know it's always been a push for affordable housing, but this is not going to help push it anymore.
Eva, could I just ask one question that's really relevant to what Jill's just talking about? I can
Sure.
wait. if you
No,
want
no,
to.
I was going to go next, but that's okay. You go
Well,
ahead.
it's just, I was thinking about it in relation to mixed use. possible projects. Because, I think if Narragansett can do anything, that would be about the only place where we really could move forward with affordable housing. So in that respect, I mean, I think maybe there's something here that could be valuable, but I haven't understood it all yet anyway.
Yeah.
So.
The adaptive reuse component
That's
kind of
another-
leads
yeah.
us in that direction, but I can tell you that the Affordable Housing Collaborative has been working for
I know.
over a year on writing a
And
mixed-use
getting-
ordinance. And I've been working with them, and they are very close to having something ready for this council to see. If not for this deadline we're working on right now, you likely would have that ordinance in your hands. So we weren't being forced, and I
Right,
believe there's a groundswell of support for doing some mixed-use zoning somewhere in town.
All right, sorry for getting in the middle of that, Eva.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. So again, thanks for the presentation. Thanks for, all the work on this. It is a lot. It's a lot for all of us to digest as well. But my question is, so when you've spoken to your municipal counterparts, I mean, what's the feeling of like all this legislation having passed, and what kind of involvement was there from the municipalities, from the level of the planners? Because obviously this isn't my language that I speak. So and what's the plan going forward for anything that creeps up from the
That's a great
State House?
question, and I'm proud to say that the American Planning Association Rhode Island chapter, of which I'm a member, has a legislative review committee. They've been very active over the last, I'd say, 5 legislative sessions. And they took very active involvement in reviewing all of those bills that I pointed out on the first slide. We sent, and the way that we work is mostly on Zoom, but we have meetings at least once a month, and everybody gets to speak. And then once we've spoken about, say, a bill that we didn't feel comfortable with the original draft of, 1 or 2 people take charge of it, and others send their information in. With every one of these bills that you saw, we wrote letters, in some cases supporting the concept and then asking for some changes. In other cases, actually recommending that they be, shelved and rethought. A few things did get changed that we saw that came from our group, but a lot of what we said was not listened to at all and was not incorporated in the bills. We were, to give you a somewhat conclusionary comment, we were somewhat disappointed in the cumulative outcome of all those bills. We made some, I thought, really great suggestions on how to take a good idea and turn it into a bill that could really be workable and allows for more local determination than what we're seeing. It was not incorporated. A lot of it was not incorporated.
Yeah, I feel it wasn't a very transparent process. It was very disappointing.
Planners were actively involved, and I
Thank
have
you.
to say the League of Cities and Towns staff was very helpful to us also.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Kopech.
I was really fascinated by the idea of the Superior Court being involved with this concept. And so I didn't see anything very specific in the law. I tried to read all these laws earlier. And one of the concerns I have is that I'm pretty sure that on the Superior Court staffing side, there's nobody who's really a building expert. So do we know if there's going to be some sort of training or knowledge or experience on the part of the Superior Court, judicial offices to manage this? Because it seems like it would be a nightmare to me.
In short, no. Excuse me. In short, no. We are aware that there are some judges who are very well versed in zoning and development. We can only hope that 1 or more of those judges are appointed to the calendar and appointed. I would have to defer to Mr. Marcello, who's in the audience, that they would be appointed for lengthy periods of time, not just on a case ad hoc basis.
Right.
Because there are some judges who haven't done a lot
Zero
of this.
experience, yeah. Okay,
And
thank
I'm
you.
not sure about their staff either, to be honest.
Right, thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Ferranti?
Thank you, Eva. Just a few more questions. I know there was something mentioned about the merger clause and how this might affect us. And I don't know, I know we've unmerged the lots, I believe. We don't allow merging up until, I think it was back in the 70s or 80s, whatever it was. But, so do we have an ordinance that we can build around to a new merger clause for those new merged lots? I mean, is things like that being thought of to try to get an idea of, get a handle on that, depending on, because that could be a big issue. That could transform a lot of neighborhoods even more, adding.
We have a merger clause in our ordinance, and it basically says if you own multiple adjacent non-conforming lots, they're considered merged into as many conforming parcels as they add up to. So say you had 4,000 or 5,000 square foot lots in an R10 zone, you'd have two building lots. But the new law has indicated that merger will not be considered in that sort of a formula there if the properties in the surrounding area, if the lots are similar in size and area to the properties around, and that they would be, even if they were abutting, owned in kind, if the development around that area is similar to what those are, they will not have to be merged. There's more to it than that, but that's kind of a synthesis of it all. So we don't have, to answer your question, we don't have that choice to put stronger language in. The General Assembly has told us what we're going to do.
So it has all, it's going to have rules for these unmerged lots also, to go that far as
Well,
the same setbacks we
that
have?
dovetails with the reduced setback, the
Okay.
reduced dimensional requirements.
Yeah,
So if you have a 5,000 square foot lot in an R10 zone, all of your setbacks and lot area requirements would be reduced by half.
okay, and then the bulk zoning, I'm sure you've made amendments, are you planning on amendments to that to kind of
Virtually
keep the pace?
Everything that's quantifiable, we are looking at.
Yeah.
Not everything is going to be changed. But we will be looking at some of those elements of the bulk zoning ordinance. But there are some aspects that will not be reduced.
Yeah, because I think, from a people's standpoint, the easier way you can relay it to what it was before, and what it would be after new zoning, as best as you can. I mean, that's what people really understand in the neighborhoods.
One thing
and
I
whatnot.
can say is we have had some internal discussions about dimensional standards to get a special use permit. For example, multifamily development in our town of 3 dwelling units or more needs a special use permit, and there's 2 pages of standards. Those will not be affected because those are requirements in order to get to the special use permit. So those will not be affected by these reductions.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lawler.
Okay, one last
Probably,
question.
yeah.
So I think now I understand when we put this on the agenda, Mike, I believe you said you reluctantly asked us to put this on the agenda, and I appreciate your reluctance and the comments of the planning board, and I know you guys are doing your best. But just a clarifying question for what Steve just asked. I don't know if it was back in the 70s, but maybe 90s, if there was a lot that was in sequence with the same last name, they were all merged together. Is this going to unring that bell? So if we have someone, it will unring that bell?
To a degree, yes. Now, if say you have a bunch of 20-foot wide lots, but you're in a neighborhood that has all 10,000 square foot lots as built upon, that won't work.
So if you had two 10,000 next to each other and they did not respond to the notice that was sent by the town, and the town merged those two together as one parcel, now those can be 2 different parcels?
Depending upon the surroundings, yes.
Okay.
And, yeah, it opens up a whole range of potential development.
You guys are going to have a lot of work, so thank you in advance.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I know you have another meeting coming up at 6, so for the sake of time,
But you didn't get a second question.
It's
so
okay.
if you want, I'm here.
I know. So what we can do is also, other council members may ask you, or, I'm sure we'll have other opportunities to comment. Mr. Frey?
Yeah.
Sure.
So I wanted to begin by echoing some points made by Mr. Fleming earlier tonight. But I also want to really acknowledge and thank the staff. Mike DeLuca and Jill Sabo have done a yeoman's job working on these ordinances in a really tight time frame. But I want to add 3 points to the discussion. And Terry really touched on these before. The changes in our ordinance create a lot of new bureaucracy, as you've seen in Mike's presentation. They create a lot more work for staff and for the planning board. The building official and the community development offices are both going to need additional staff to implement these regulations that came from the state. Second, as a result of these changes in our ordinance, we're going to see some major changes in development in Narragansett. These changes totally disregard the comprehensive plan for where development will take place and the density of development. And the changes will be especially problematic long-term, in my opinion, because they increase the density permitted on septic systems in areas without sewer. So they're going to pollute the Narrow River, the salt ponds, and our groundwater. We don't really have control over those changes. It's coming. The changes also reduce public notice, as Mike alluded to earlier. The notice for modifications, 15% variance, you have 10 days to neighbors. It changes the burden of responsibility of notifying the neighbors from the person proposing it to the town. So it's additional work for the town. And then the neighbors, if they don't respond in 10 days to object to the variance, it's pretty much by right. These changes and their impacts on the character of our communities are not because of planning staff. They're not because of the planning board or you, the town council. Rather, they're because of the legislative changes championed by the speaker earlier this year and adopted by the General Assembly. And Mike was a little polite. I've done legislative work in 4 states over the last 30 years. And this legislative package has some of the worst drafting, just if you agree or disagree with it, just looking at the language, the drafting is some of the worst I've ever seen. Internally inconsistent within a couple paragraphs of the same bill. The bill with our recommended changes that we were talking about for the modification, just to clarify, the recommended changes are about the 15%, not the 5%. So I think that's really important as far as the character of our communities going forward, remaining consistent with our existing standards. And my 4th point, and Terry made this earlier, sadly, and contrary to the claims of the General Assembly and the proponents of this legislation, these dramatic changes in our ordinance and the resulting development that will be built will have very, very little impact on affordable housing in Narragansett. And sadly, the legislation passed by the General Assembly did not give the town the tools we need to create affordable housing for low-income residents and for families and for our workforce. So just thought I'd add those to the discussion.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you for your
Thank you.
points. And thank you for your vigilance at the State House as well, and bringing to attention some of those bills that were coming, that just popped up. So, I'll say, okay. Yep, so it's, the time is 6 p.m. The planning board is starting their meeting, or is supposed to be starting their meeting. So with that, I will adjourn.